Hello, everyone. I'm so excited for this conversation today. I get to have Waylon Lewis and his amazing mother, Linda, on to have a conversation about Buddhism and being of benefit. His mom, Linda, has been a Buddhist teacher for decades and has been studying the Dharma since the 1970s. So I'm really excited to hear their perspectives on
His
how we
mom,
can
Linda, has been a
utilize
Buddhist teacher
Buddhism
for
as a
decades
framework
and has
for
been
living a life
studying
of
the Dharma
service
since the
and being of
1970s.
benefit.
So I'm
Thanks
really
for everyone
excited
who's
to
joining.
hear their
I'm going
perspectives
to
on how we
have
can
Elephant
utilize
Journal
Buddhism as a framework
be added
for
as a
living a life
moderator
of
here.
service and being of benefit. Thanks for everyone
All
who's joining.
right.
I'm going to have Elephant Journal be added as a moderator here.
Okay, send a request. Let's see.
All right.
Okay, thanks for your patience, everyone.
Send a
This takes just
request.
a
Let's see.
minute to get it all set up correctly. And there we are. Hello. Can you both hear me okay?
Yes. Perfectly, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Hi, Waylon. Hi, Linda. Thank you both so much for joining me today for this Buddhism and Being of Benefit Part 2 interview conversation. Yeah. So most of you who are on Elephant Journal or follow me know Waylon already. He's the founder of Elephant Journal, the largest online mindfulness magazine, which has changed my life and the lives of so many. And he's a good friend of mine and someone whose wisdom I always seek out on pretty much all topics. And his mom is here with us today, Linda, who I'm so excited is able to join us. And Linda is a longtime Buddhist teacher. I think you've been teaching Buddhism for decades and been studying Dharma since the 1970s. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, beautiful. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today. And I'd love for you each to just take a minute to share a little bit about your journey with Buddhism, what that's looked like, and what it's provided for you in your life thus far.
You want to start?
You mean for Mama?
Either of you, whoever wants to go first.
I think Mama starts.
Okay.
Okay. I guess we can begin with the bow because that's what Waylon likes to do, and it's very traditional. And it's just an expression of mutual respect to everyone that's present in this online community. So take a good posture, an uplifted posture, and then relax and bow, respect, and then back up. Yeah, and it also slows us down. So that's very important because speed, although it has a lot of energy, is also often in a form of aggression. The more that we're able to slow down, the more we're able to notice and be mindful and express, send our awareness out. And in order to be a benefit, it's really important to join the awareness with the mindfulness. So I won't talk a lot about my early beginnings, but just mention that, yes, I guess you could say I was a closet Buddhist before I met Trungpa Rinpoche. And I met him in a program in Wyoming called Crazy Wisdom. And it was full of young people. And to be completely honest, I loved the energy and I loved learning how to meditate because that was a missing component for me. I could read Dharma books, but I didn't really have any meditation instruction. I loved the young people and the energy of the community, but to be honest, I didn't understand much of what he was saying. So I was rather shy at the time. People were asking all these intelligent questions, and I was impressed by his students' intelligence. But I wound up toward the end being brave enough to go up to him and ask one-on-one because he would hang out. He was so available. He would also talk to people one-on-one. So my first question to him was, what is Tantra? What is this Tantra you keep talking about? And he smiled and he said, if I told you, you wouldn't understand.
Mm.
I felt, oh, like I must not be worthy. That was my first feeling. I felt, it's sort of, but I was immobilized. I couldn't move from the spot. And because I stayed there, and this was not skillful means on my part, I was just immobilized in front of him. He began to tell me what Tantra was. And it was quite true. I didn't understand a word that he was saying. I remember the words he said, continuity of awareness and so forth.
Mm.
But what I got was this loving, smiling, welcoming presence.
Mm.
And then he suggested that Boulder, the community was really thriving. This was in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And, I've been very independent. I've been on my own since I was 16. And normally if someone suggests something, no, I'll just do my own thing. But I was so kind of hooked instantly by the intelligence and the brilliance and the warmth and the welcoming all around the community and him. And right away I had an offer of a ride. So I went to Boulder and I was further hooked.
And this was like 1972?
1972.
Wow.
Boulder was kind of still a cowboy town at the time. It wasn't at all yuppified. And forgive me if I'm
I love it.
kind of delightfully funky.
Mm.
There was a hardware store called Valentine's right on the corner of Pearl Street, not the mall, and Broadway. And we were 1111 Pearl Street, which is now the Boulder Bookstore, was where we met. And it was at first in very humble beginnings, and then we expanded to the whole second floor. Anyway, I was hooked. And the way that Trungpa Rinpoche taught was you need to go through the paths and stages. So at first there was the Hinayana, where you learn about the Eightfold Path, right motivation, right view, right speech, as you said, right action, right livelihood, all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. And then you get into the Mahayana with that foundation. And the Mahayana of the Buddha Dharma, Maha meaning greater vehicle, greater jnana meaning vehicle, greater path, you could say, is all about the combination of compassion and emptiness. And often when people hear the word emptiness, they're intimidated. They think of nihilism, but that's not what it is. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. That everything is interrelated and that we tend to think of everything as permanent, and solid and singular. But in fact, everything, including ourselves, is impermanent and not solid. Mm-hmm. And engenders even more compassion. Mm. So the spacious quality, or you could say emptiness, the lack of self-entity in phenomena and in person, engenders even more compassion. Mm. So when you have less to no separation between self and other, compassion can just flow. Mm. So that's the basis of the compassion, the spontaneous compassion. Mm. You don't have to be a social worker, but that's the basis of the spontaneous compassion that works in the world according to the Buddha Dharma.
Oh. That was amazing. And I have to say that being transfixed that you experienced back in the 70s, that's how I felt as you were talking. So whatever the magic is that was transmitted to you, you absolutely embody it now. And that is so cool that one conversation about Tantra is what was the origin of your whole history in Boulder, and therefore Waylon's history in Boulder, and the existence of Elephant and our friendship, all of that can be traced back to that one conversation.
Yeah. I met Waylon's father because he was part of the community. So, yeah. And then I stayed in Boulder for 16 years.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank goodness you did. So would you say that the ego acts as a barrier that doesn't allow for compassion to be as expansive or as spontaneous as it would be if the ego were dissolved?
Yes, ego tends to be self-oriented, and then because it's self first, it impedes the spontaneous flow. And like just the ability to be with people and care and communicate does so much, and especially during the pandemic when so many people were isolated. I don't have a car, nor does Waylon, as you know, and so I would take the bus, and I'm still in the habit, and I kind of always have been in the habit of talking to whoever's in the bus shelter. And usually I'll start with a question like, what bus are you taking? And then ask them about the bus that I would like if it's not the same, and when it's coming. And then continue to engage, but when I walk into the bus shelter, everyone's on their cell phone, right? So I learn a lot about the students that are going to Dalhousie University or St. Mary's University or wherever. I find out a lot about the immigrants, how it affects us, such a diverse population. People from all over live here, and people from all over come to study. So I see them again. If I tend to go at certain times, I'll tend to see the same people. So you build up, maybe not friendships, but acquaintances, and you put smile on people's faces. And that makes a great deal, the fact that you're interested in them. A little bit about what they're studying, and we're not having in-depth conversations necessarily. Well, you're going beyond ego to be curious about other people. In terms of the immigrants, you can be spontaneously helpful because they're looking to find certain places, and you can tell them where things are in town. Things like that. Great deal.
I think that's such a great metaphor or visual for what happens when we look up out of the ego, looking down at our phone when our consciousness is on ourselves, when we're fixated on the little I over here, the small self. And instead, when we put the phone down, when we put the ego away, metaphorically, and we look up, then we can see all of a sudden all of the opportunities to be of benefit that we perhaps couldn't have seen before.
Right on. Exactly.
Beautiful. Okay, well, we dove right into all of that because you're amazing, and Waylon, I can see why you wanted her to be part of this conversation, but I want to back up for just a minute and talk about where we left off last time. So for those of you who didn't tune in for part 1 of this conversation, this is part 2 because we realized that 1 hour was not nearly enough to cover everything that we wanted to cover on Buddhism and being of benefit. So if you did miss part 1, I'm just going to quickly go over what we talked about when Waylon and I had this previous conversation. We talked about how there's a difference between loving and being attached, and how to distinguish between the two of those. We talked about how the Buddhist community is not immune from abuse because it is run by people, and people are fallible. We talked about how to not throw the baby out with the bathwater with religion, how to really take what works and leave what doesn't. We talked about basic goodness or Buddha nature that is present in everyone, and how meditation supports us in realizing that basic goodness within us and within others, and how meditation supports us in being less attached to our opinion and therefore more open to being real about the impact of our actions. And we talked about where emotions and reason both have the potential to lead us astray on the path to being of benefit. So that was just some of the bullet points that we covered in that last conversation. If you're interested in hearing more about that, be sure that you check out part 1, which is on my Instagram and also on my YouTube. And today we want to kind of slow down and take a few steps back, because that first conversation was really in the nitty-gritty of it, and zoom out and first talk about what is it actually to even be of benefit. So I'd love to hear both of your interpretation of what it means to live a life of benefit.
You want to go? Well, the Mahayana is definitely about being a benefit, definitely. And after every practice, we dedicate the merit for the benefit of all sentient beings, which means not just humans, but all sentient beings. And recognizing the interdependence of everything is another view that really helps, and that starts actually in the Hinayana. So I think, you know, one way to approach it is to care, you know, like to actually care about the environment, to care about people, not to just walk by, not to ignore, but to actually move in the direction, extend. And, you know, it's challenging sometimes, it derails you sometimes, but wherever you can actually be a benefit, it gives you joy. It really, you know, there's a very famous saying that originated with a great Buddha Dharma teacher many centuries ago that said, his name was Shantideva, who said, if you want to be miserable, you know, think about only yourself. If you want to be cheerful, joyful, think of others. And that's the Mahayana view in a nutshell.
And part of the key of that, which I've learned over years of repeating this to people, because we're in a generally a Western mindset, is thinking of others includes ourselves, because we're all interdependent. So it's not like you don't care about yourself. You still have to be kind to yourself, Maitri, take care of yourself, loving kindness. But you're in service to the whole world and all sentient beings. Like you said, animals, all people, even people you don't like, people are irritating. And that worldview brings you some joy. Right.
Even the Buddha, he had a wonderful follower named Ananda, who, you know, just was completely devoted to him, and began to sort of ignore his own needs to take care of the Buddha. And Buddha turned to him and said, eat, Ananda, you know, no body, and you're not being a benefit, you know, you have to have a body in order to continue to be a benefit.
Yeah.
So it has its origin, you know. But the tendency, of course, in the Western world is to think of self first, and then if there's no time or pesos left, then maybe others. But it doesn't have to be, you know, for people listening, it doesn't have to be a project or a program. It can be just how you live spontaneously. You know? I have a friend that works very, very hard, but she's such a generous person. She has a car. I don't have a car. Waylon doesn't have a car. But you know, if I really need transportation to a doctor, she will take me there. You know, she's not the only one. So somehow the exchange begins to happen when you're friends with, you know, such individuals, and then they spontaneously want to say, yes, I'd be glad to. I can take an hour off. I can use my lunch break or whatever it is. And then they are willing to help. And it's give and take. And it enriches both of our lives. And it can extend into projects and programs so that you really begin to care about the environment, and you really begin to care about climate change, which is so vividly real. It's impossible to ignore anymore. And, you know, the migrant situation, all these in the world, you become really interested in informing yourself and seeing what can the world mean to you, you know? And it's amazing what is possible. You know, there's the Nature Conservatory of Canada, and there's all these different things that one can contribute just a small amount to if that's all you have. But you're giving, and then you, to your delight, you find out that there's a whole new nature reserve in Nova Scotia because of many people donating a small amount of money made it possible.
And selfishly, like, we tend to feel powerless and depressed sometimes when we dare to care about the problems in the world. And if we don't even do a little bit to help, we feel completely disengaged, and then we're isolated in the lie that we can't be of benefit. And even doing like your little contribution, you're connected with millions of other people are doing a little contribution, and then you see big results sometimes if they're effective, if they're skillful.
Yeah.
So in a paradoxical way, it is selfish to be of benefit, because when we're being of benefit, then our sense of self becomes so much more expansive. We get to experience spontaneous compassion. We get the joy and the happiness and the connection that comes along with caring. But we can't make being of benefit be about what it's going to do for us, because then that's still the focus on ourselves. So it's kind of a paradox. The moment that that's not our intention, that our intention is not to serve ourselves, then what we need naturally comes to us. Am I getting that right?
That's right, because everything is interconnected. And so, that the benefit, of course, comes back. You're not doing it, as you said, for that ulterior motive. You're really out offering whatever happens. And there's no guarantee, as Trump Rinpoche would say, but because of interdependence, it tends to be so. There's a tendency for that to happen. Anyway, you feel you do have the joy, of knowing, in that one little example of a nature reserve, not far away, that you can go hiking. And this may sound kind of silly, but I had a friend take me there, and I was born on the West Coast. I've been on oceans, my whole life, but when I went to this one that was so untouched and is now preserved and included forest and marshland and ocean and hills, and it was really amazing for untouched land. And walking on the little beach, I found the first starfish I've ever found. Yeah, it was a storm it wasn't still alive, but a storm had washed it way up, and it was all dry. And I took it home as a little treasure. I've never seen, I don't know, that sounds
All your ocean years, you've never
I've
seen
never seen that.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. So here's a paradox that I have perceived that I'm curious if you can elucidate for me. From my shaky understanding of Buddhist teachings, so correct me if whatever I say is inaccurate, desire is one of the roots of suffering. Am I getting that right?
Okay, so there are those three yanas, or the three vehicles, or three stages. And in the Hinayana, because you're concentrating on yourself and you're trying to discipline yourself and to develop loving kindness for yourself, it tends to be true. That's what is talked about. Okay. In the Mahayana, you could say the desire is to be of benefit, and that's not problematic.
Okay. So what's the distinction there?
Right. And in the Vajrayana, desire is just not a problem at all.
Okay.
Just to be clear, the Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, these are different stages of the Buddhist path, basically.
Okay.
And you kind of do one after the other, but you can also kind of do all three at once. So, and they're pretty harder as you go along in a way.
That's right. And so in the Mahayana, it's emphasized that really often the word in Tibetan, chakme, desireless, it is actually referring to without attachment. So it's not desire that's the problem, but I think we might have touched on that the week before in your summary of last week.
Yeah.
But it's actually the sticky quality of attachment
That's, the kind of,
okay, in a relationship, you're glued to this person and it has to be that way, and it's not seeing that ventilation and air and so forth, spaciousness is part of the relationship, and together, perhaps in different ways, is
great.
Well, you're attached to your idea of your relationship and of them, and you're not actually seeing them all the time.
That's right.
So on a practical level, how do we, for example, care about reversing climate change without being attached to the outcome?
That's a tough question, because I myself find myself getting attached, to positive results, and so disappointed, which is always the flip side, hope, fear, of disappointed when the results don't manifest. You don't give up. And the thing with Buddhist practice is you do see your attachment to the cause, and you do see, okay, I'm giving it my best shot, and then after you've done everything you can, you do have to let go, not withdraw, but okay, it might, if you're able to let go in the sense that I mean, then you're able to have a fresh start and start again in a way, perhaps more skillfully, to achieve some kind of success. You don't give up, you keep trying. But if you fall into attachment, which as I said, I confess I do sometimes, because I parasite.
Well, we all do.
We all do.
As long as you can see it, then you're able to let go of the disappointment much more quickly.
That's the next
good thing you can do in that direction.
So it's not so much not having the attachment, it's having awareness of when attachment is arising and being willing to acknowledge that within yourself and do your best to let it go.
That's it. That's the Dharma way.
And it is possible, I'm hearing, to have desire without attachment, to actually separate those two.
Yes, I mean, Trump Rinpoche was all for people in the community getting married, and beyond the community getting married and having children and an enriched life, that children raised in an uplifted household could only be a benefit. So it's not like everyone should be a loner, and also I found myself in my own situations that when you raise a child, naturally all the paramitas, or the Mahayana practices of generosity and patience and all of those things, organically you develop as a mother or a parent, because the child has to come first. So you're constantly engendering compassion and doing your best as a model for the child. The desire that led to family and kids, it can be very positive. But again, there has to be a lot of space and not clinging.
So would you say that the practice of being of benefit wakes us up?
For sure.
Okay. So we don't need to wait until we have attained enlightenment through being of service, through making our lives be about something other than ourselves. This is a way that we can wake up.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. You've got the Buddha Dharma view. You have a lot of insight. You really do. You do. You have a lot of insight.
Oh, well, thank you.
That's the misconception about enlightenment, is it's not like a sudden event. I'm saying that like you can have sudden enlightenment, but it took you like 1,000 lifetimes to get to that point. So it's the point is it's a gradual process. And Buddha means wake up, right? The awakened one. So just constantly, I think some Buddhist teacher said, you're enlightened when you see a red light and you're driving and you stop, that's enlightenment. Like just being awake and present with anything is a measure of enlightenment. And the more deeply and fully you can be enlightened, and the more continually, the more you're enlightened. But it's not like you get some award when you're enlightened. So I think enlightenment is sort of a fun thing to think about or talk about. But in Buddhism, it's way less important than being a benefit, which ironically, as my mom has already discussed with you, is what leads to enlightenment.
The other thing with the word enlightenment is that as long as you conceive of enlightenment as a goal, then it's future oriented. So the Buddha Dharma is all about being present. So enlightenment is going to be in the present moment. I'm saying the same thing, is the awareness now.
Okay. And what role?
The only other thing I would say, Brandy, is like you brought up the desire. So there's like the three poisons, the three root neuroses. I think you're talking about that in terms of desire. Ignorance are the other two. And I think desire, like Trungpa Rinpoche, her teacher, was super specific about semantics, about translation of words. Desire is sort of not the poison. It's more attachment, or it's more craving, because desire can be fun. You know, you can sexual desire, or, you know, Trungpa Rinpoche would always talk about yun, like quality, craft, richness, like you were talking about richness in family.
Enriching presence.
That can be wonderful. So it's really attachment or craving, which I certainly have.
Yeah, I mean, I think desire can be appreciation. You know, like it doesn't mean, I mean, like even when it's about a person, it doesn't mean that you have to score. You can really just love and appreciate that person, you know. And so it's like that. So the whole phenomenal world you can appreciate, and there doesn't have to be any attachment or craving or grasping.
Well, and also like you and Alex, you know, I saw you're like traveling together in your honeymoon, your wedding, and you know, you adopted these beautiful doggies. Like, you desire to feed them, you desire to have romance with your loved one. Like, these are wonderful. They're not there's like sort of guilt about that.
And that desire that is beneficial, I'm hearing, comes from present moment appreciation. It's not being attached to something in the future. It's, I already love this.
That's right.
And because I already love this, then I desire to take care of it.
That's right. Boy, you're good.
She's really good.
What role would you say that suffering plays in the path of waking up and the path of being of benefit? Is there utility to suffering?
Well, this is an interesting thing. And my experience is a work in progress, you could say. But one of my teachers, referring to the emptiness quality I referred to before, the spacious quality, talked about the dreamlike experience of life. So on the one hand, Buddha Dharma, because it's free from attachment and everything, and we tend to cling, by seeing everything as dreamlike, that's one aspect that liberates you. On the other hand, you engender so much compassion for people who suffer because they do cling, because they are fixated. You know, like, you know, someone that's forever fixated on another person and can't move on. That kind of situation is real suffering, which is unnecessary. So there's genuine suffering, like hunger and the migrant crisis, and, you know, I mean, endless, with climate change and species going extinct at a more rapid rate, and forests being logged, which is like humans are committing suicide by doing such things, as well as killing all the wildlife that live there, that those forests and marshlands and everything else are their habitat. But then there's also the unnecessary suffering of fixation. And so we engender as much compassion as we can for those who don't see that the dreamlike, spacious, you could say letting go aspect of of the phenomenal world. Like the present moment is so fleeting. The past is gone. The future isn't here. It's just your imagination. All we have is the present. By meditating, we can come to a full stop. I mean, it takes time. It's a gradual process, watching our minds slow down. But when we do that on the cushion, we have a chance to really at least stop our own suffering and allow our mind to be completely spacious, slowly, gradually. And then as we go out into the world, we can be of more benefit to people who are our friends, who maybe are stuck in some aspect. And, maybe one-on-one, gently suggest just one thing, have one comment, or even ask a question. Is that so? Like sometimes asking the question, is that really so? Can make a person have a little gap, just question the solidity of what they're caught up in.
Yeah. I've heard it said that suffering equals pain times resistance. To what extent does that hold water in the Buddhist understanding?
That's a good one. I think also there's a slight difference between pain and suffering. Like the enlightened teachers that I have known can experience pain but don't suffer. So the suffering, when we talk about suffering, so much of suffering is actually a mental event. Like my teacher was half paralyzed, but he sort of turned it into a way to bring people even closer to him. And he was extremely graceful with his one right hand. And His Holiness Karmapa died of cancer in the Chicago hospital. And he didn't want painkillers. And stomach cancer is extremely painful. And people kept coming into the room and saying, how are you? Or do you want some meds? But no, I'm fine. No problem. No, He kept just being with it, which is a kind of amazing experience. To witness, to be around someone like that. So I had the benefit of being around Trungpa Rinpoche for over 15 years, witnessing him over and over again, move, walk into the shrine room slowly. He would turn it into a situation that also slowed our minds, when we were bowing to him as he passed and so forth. And when he began to teach in Boulder, and I was still quite new, he would talk slowly, and there would be gaps even in the sentence. And I would lose the continuity from what he first said to what he second said. But what I would notice, so I was, I guess, picking up on show more than tell, was how gracefully he set the glass down on the table without making a sound. Just so present and mindful. Or, Boulder in the summer, if there was a fly or something, he would so gently, he wasn't like trying to shoo it away. He was just so graceful. I learned a lot by just watching him. And I know that the people that, were there for the decline of His Holiness Karmapa also were so impressed that someone could be dying of stomach cancer. And he would say things like nothing happens. It's fine. And he also
Nothing happens.
Nothing happens. In other words, from the absolute point of view, everything is fine. It's just as it is. It is seeing things as it is. not trying to change it, not
trying to transform it, not trying to fix it.
as it is, in terms of his own physical situation. And I remember he called in a foremost student, a Western student, into his presence, saying, and the student thought that he was going to have secret teachings, really, oh, this is going to be really, really meaningful. And the Karmapa's final parting words to this foremost student was, just be kind.
Just be kind.
That
was the pith instructions, like instead of some kind of huge Vajrayana view or practice or something.
Wow, beautiful. So what I'm hearing from that is that suffering is not necessary for the path of waking up, because suffering is pain plus the mental gymnastics that we do to either cling to that pain or try to avoid that pain. But it sounds like pain might be necessary in order for us to wake up.
I think that neither pain nor suffering need to be necessary, but that they happen. Different people have different karma, different genetics, different, situations. And, the word suffering gets used so widely that when we see that the world is suffering, that there is starvation and so forth, that's, we're compelled to be compassionate in those instances. But individually, if we're beginning to have insight and meditate, we can distinguish for ourselves the subtle difference between pain and suffering. There is a difference. And the more that one practices, one can actually be with the pain, but suffer less. It is possible.
But just maybe I'll phrase this as a question, but like in the, Shambhala teachings, Buddhist teachings, Trungpa Rinpoche talks a lot about broken heart. And I think this whole conversation dangerously gets into this sort of kind of spiritual naive idea. Not that any of this isn't true, but people often go into spirituality thinking I can get rid of all feeling.
Oh yeah, no.
I'll just be totally present. I'll be like Neo in the Matrix. Everything will be great. I'll drink smoothies and run around with my good vibes only pillow. But Trungpa Rinpoche talked a lot about the virtue of feeling brokenhearted all the time, a little bit, being cheerful and uplifted, but you want your heart to just be raw and open and vulnerable and caring. And it's okay to be brokenhearted. Like that, I always think of that scene at the end of Schindler's List, when Oscar Schindler is like, I could have saved, 5 more lives with this pin. He's heartbroken. He's a wreck. And it's because he's thinking about how he could have helped a couple more people from the Holocaust. He could have saved them.
Yeah. So there's this is a good distinguishing too. There's happiness, so-called happiness, and or you could say joy. Joy is a better term. And sadness are flip sides of the same coin.
But say more about why is joy a more precise term than happiness? Because that's interesting.
So happiness is based on happenstance, like conditional happiness, like I'm happy because of this and this happened. But joy, you can be happy no matter what the circumstances are. This is equally valuable in that it softens your heart. So having genuine sadness is different, like when I said, so there's suffering and pain distinction, but there's also joy and sadness. So you can't live life without experiencing both joy and sadness. Genuine heart sadness is as valuable as joy. And the tendency in Western society for sure, and most of the world actually, is they just want to be happy. Which is understandable, but it's hopeless. you know, but, you know, there's no guarantee, you know, like, you know, stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, feeling the sadness for people suffering, you know, feeling the genuine heart of sadness is just so tenderizing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, makes you more open.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of sadness is not at all focused on self and being depressed.
Mm-hmm.
It's genuine heart of sadness is a wide open, like sometimes you even tear up, you know, over a situation that you're just feeling so compelled to be able to do something, or why does it have to be this way? Or, oh, I'm so sorry. You know, this is,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
anyway.
And you're not attached to this. But the beautiful thing about Buddhism, it's about the middle way. I think we touched on that last time.
Mm-hmm.
So then your mind first goes to like, okay, without suffering, you know, I can experience pain, be totally present. Life is good. Like I can be happy all the time, basically. But then you think, oh no, sadness, genuine heart of sadness, that's a virtue. I'm tender, I'm vulnerable. But then we tend to get attached to that. And we write novels about our sadness or our tenderness or our trauma and then you have to remember, oh, I don't need to be attached to that either. I can fully experience it bravely. And then I think the rest of that poem I'm thinking of with Trungpa Rinpoche is like, you feel the slightest breeze on your raw, open heart because it's completely open. But the notion is you're also letting go of that. But then you're not even like, the great thing is it's just very common sense. I think that's what I appreciate about it.
In another way to express it is, especially in the Mahayana, you're bringing together all dichotomies. You know, like the world tends to want to, especially these days, be polar.
Right.
But you know, you know that they're together.
Yeah.
And so the Mahayana view is very strong in bringing opposites together, and the fruition of the middle way, as it slides into the view of Buddha nature, is actually to see that there's no middle, there's no concept. You know, like, first there's these opposing concepts, and you're bringing a lot together, and then in the middle way
there's no together.
There's nothing fixed, so that allows you to be more and more spontaneous.
Attached. The point is ego, which you started by talking about, can be attached to anything. So the ego could be like, I'm the middle way. I'll never be extreme. And then you have to be like, thinking, come back to your breath, become present again, let go of that.
Yeah. I'm hearing that every distinction in Buddhism is a vessel that once you integrate it within your being, it dissolves, and the concept no longer has utility because all concepts are based in duality. So once
a Dharma person, beautifully articulated. I'm really impressed.
I'm just reflecting back what I'm hearing. That's all I'm doing. And the other thing I'm hearing is the extent to which we're willing to be with genuine sadness is the extent to which we're able to experience genuine joy. We cannot have one without the other. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm noticing that it's almost been an hour already, which is wild because it feels like it's been 10 minutes. I have many other questions that I wanted to go over with you. And I know, Linda, you said in the beginning that moving quickly is often tied up in aggression. So I'm aware that my desire to have a speed round might not be the most enlightened desire. And I want to cover as much as possible in this live. So how do you both feel about me firing off some questions, and then you can just point to each other and decide who will answer, and we'll try to have answers be just like 20 or 30 seconds, just the most concise, whatever comes first.
20 to 30 seconds. No problem. So just one note, you can be fast and that can be joyful without being speedy and caught up in it. Present with being fast. So let's do it.
Okay.
Okay. And if it doesn't feel right to try to answer it concisely, then you can just say pass and I'll move on to the next one. Okay. Question 1, from a Buddhist perspective, what makes something immoral? Or unethical, I think is the term we used last time.
There we go. I think, yeah, we talked about ethics last time as opposed to morality. It's not a heavy-handed dogma. It's a personal longing to be of benefit. And if you're causing active harm, even in a small way, that might be regarded as unethical.
Mm-hmm.
Also, the Buddha Dharma talks a lot about discipline more than morality. Morality, that term isn't used so much.
Okay.
And a note that the word discipline, which I think is really cool, comes from the root disciple, which means to be lovingly devoted. We often associate discipline with something that's aggressive when really it's rooted in that loving devotion. Okay. Can we utilize our emotions to help us be of benefit? And if so, how?
Yes. Might take more than 20 seconds.
No.
In the Mahayana, we begin to see that the emotions are also technically the conflicting emotions, which makes them neurotic, have a pure energy aspect as well as the neurotic. So, for example, anger, there's a tremendous energy that you feel, like righteous anger, about a cause or something. And there's a tendency to identify with it, with your ego, and to kind of blow it by being speedy and aggressive. I know I'm going to.
No.
And if you can drop the reifying aspect of yourself, I am right, they're wrong, and the separation between self and other. And if you can ride the energy without emoting the neurotic aspect of the anger, you have the intellectual energy to be precise without the mess that otherwise gets
And
created.
time.
Beautiful. Yeah. And emotions are energy in motion. So when we can be with how that energy is moving through us in the present moment, then it has the potential to open something up for us rather than getting caught up in the story.
That's right. Uh-oh. Frozen.
Sorry, I'll come back.
Okay.
Oh.
You were frozen for a second.
Okay. So being with the energy of the emotion in the present and riding it until it opens something up for us rather than getting caught in the story.
Right.
About the
Not suppressing the emotion nor emoting. But yeah.
Okay, beautiful. I think we could do a whole live on that one. So I'll bookmark that for later. All right. Should we wish happiness or joy for those who do harm?
Well, you want them to be well too. There's a practice called Tonglen, sending and taking, where you begin perhaps small. You open yourself up, having meditated, and you open yourself up to vastness, big view. And then you might start small and you extend and you extend and you extend. And then you include even who you might call enemy. You include Putin, which is a challenge.
But that's the point. It's meant to be challenging. You're not wishing them success in causing harm. You're wishing, if Hitler, people often say if Hitler had become an artist, which he longed to be, he might not have killed and tortured millions of people.
And do you believe that those who have authentic joy do less harm?
I think that anyone who has that combination between joy, feels the joy and the brokenheartedness, the genuine heart sadness. Yes.
Beautiful. We covered a lot of this. Okay. I think this will have to be the last question so we can wrap up before Instagram kicks us off. If we were to lose the ability to cognize the world with language right, or create a conceptual world, would our suffering stop?
No, I think suffering would continue until we could at least take a time out each day to come to a full stop. And then if language weren't happening, to really look, appreciate, be aware, and appreciate show. Like I said, Trump Rinpoche's taught me while my mind was still so speedy, by setting the glass down quietly and by just gently asking the fly or whatever it was to, you know, not be on his head. I think there's a lot that we can learn beyond language.
Okay, so suffering is not just rooted in the stories that we tell ourselves about the world.
Although a lot of suffering comes from the storyline.
Okay,
So
but there's more to it than that.
Yeah, you know, like.
Well, I think the way you just put it is better than language, because the suffering is kind of rooted in the preconceptions, which you can have without language or with language. Language manifestation often of preconceptions, but as we know from great speakers and poets and all that, language can also point toward truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It has a lot of language, and all of it is pointing to the experience, which is beyond language. But all those words are helpful pointers.
Yeah.
There's a saying in Tibet, Granny's finger pointing to the moon. You don't want to mistake Granny's finger for the moon.
I actually had a mural of that on my wall when I was in college. The carousel, the cycle of suffering, and then the Buddha pointing to the moon. My sister painted it for me.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I know that Instagram's going to kick us off in about 60 seconds here. So I want to thank you both so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brandy. Thank you everyone for watching.
We could
anyone who tuned in. Yep. And I just want to say, anyone who tuned in towards the end, this was incredible, such a important, meaningful conversation. And I really recommend you go back and give it a listen from the beginning. Thank you all so much who joined, and thank you too for your time and your enormous wisdom.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Bowing out. Thank you both so much. And this will be live for replay on my page and on Elephants as well.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brandy.
Thank you. All right, let's see.
Wow,
She's great, right?
Amazing.
Yeah.
And is she a Dharma person?